Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Alignment by Tuva. And if you're new here, my name is Tuva Marina, and I am a subconscious and somatic alignment coach. I work with nervous system health, I work with trauma-informed healing, and the deeper layers of change that do not respond to willpower, mindset hacks, or forcing your way forward. And if you have been here for a while, thank you so much. Thank you for tuning in again. This episode marks just over a year of conversations like this. Can't believe it. A year of just slowing things down enough to actually let them land in the body. A year. Wow. Thank you all for being here. Today, I want to talk about something that's often left out of the healing conversation, because a paradox I keep seeing, both in my work and in my own life, is that we heal trauma with therapy. We work with breath, we regulate the nervous system, and we develop awareness, like language, insight. But still, for so many people, something still doesn't fully shift. Like the mind understands, the body has moments of relief, but the system as a whole, doesn't quite catch up. And what is often missing from the conversation is nutrition. Nutrition, not as a diet, not as a discipline, not as another thing to optimize or control, but as a biological foundation for nervous system healing. If your nervous system hasn't caught up with your healing work yet, it may not be because you are doing it wrong. It may be because the body doesn't have the resources that it needs to feel safe enough to change. So this episode will not be about food rules or medical advice, and it is not about fixing something when it comes to nutrition. It is about understanding how trauma, stress, grief, and burnout affect the brain and also affect the nervous system, and how nutrition shapes the environment where healing either becomes possible or stays stalled. So if you have ever felt like you were doing all the right things, but you are still depleted, or your nervous system wants safety, but your body feels behind, or healing feels real, but incomplete, then this conversation is for you. We are used to thinking about food in very simple terms: calories in, calories out, fuel for the body. But that model, it is a model that is outdated, especially when we are talking about healing the nervous system. Because your nervous system doesn't experience food as fuel. It experiences food as information. Every meal you eat, it sends signals to your brain about safety, availability, threat, stability. And those signals directly shape how your nervous system functions. And what science now understands very clearly is that nutrients don't just support the brain, they modify brain function. Nutrients actually influence neuroplasticity, which is your brain's ability to change. It has a direct impact on neurotransmitter production like serotonin, dopamine, GABA. Also inflammation and immune signaling, then stress hormone regulation, and especially cortisol, and even how quickly your nervous system returns to baseline after stress. What all this means is that food is not neutral. It is not just fuel. It is actually architecture. Like your brain is constantly rebuilding itself, like synapse by synapse, and it uses what is available. For example, around 90% of serotonin is produced in the gut, not in the brain. And that production depends on amino acids, B vitamins, iron, zinc, and gut integrity. And GABA, like your main calming neurotransmitter, it relies on sufficient protein, like magnesium and vitamin B6. And omega-3 fatty acids directly affect neuronal membrane fluidity, which influences flexibility and resilience to stress. And then chronic inflammation. It often driven by blood sugar instability or nutrient deficiency, and that keeps the nervous system in a low-grade threat response. So when someone says, I'm doing the nervous system work, but my body still feels on edge, it may not be a mindset issue. It may not be a trauma issue. It may be so simple that the biological environment for healing hasn't stabilized yet. And this is something that matters deeply in trauma recovery, because trauma doesn't just live in memory, it lives in physiology. Trauma alters glucose metabolism, stress hormone sensitivity, immune responses, and gut permeability. So if the body has learned that resources are scarce, that they are unpredictable or unsafe, no amount of insight alone will convince it to soften. This is why so many people feel like they are almost there. They understand their patterns, they've named their traumas, and they've built awareness. But the nervous system is still running on old inputs. But what I want you to understand is that your nervous system doesn't heal on calories, it heals on signal and structure. Regular nourishment, it tells the body that I won't abandon you. And balanced macronutrients tell the body you don't need to stay hypervigilant. Micronutrient sufficiency tells the brain it is safe to rewire. This is not about perfection. It is not about eating clean, and it is definitely not about control. It is about understanding that healing is biological as much as it is emotional. And if the biology isn't supported, the nervous system will keep choosing protection over expansion, no matter how much inner work you have done. This is why nutrition belongs in the nervous system conversation, not as a fix, but as a foundation. Trauma doesn't just live in your thoughts, it reorganizes how your systems talk to each other. And your systems, I mean your brain, your gut, your immune system, how they are communicating. They're not separate departments, they're in constant conversation. And that conversation is called the brain-gut axis. It is a two-way communication system where the brain, it sends signals to the gut through the vagus nerve. And the gut, it sends signals back through hormones, immune messengers, and neurotransmitters. And now, this is when stress and trauma comes in, because when the nervous system spends long periods in survival mode, like fight, flight, or freeze, the body prioritizes immediate safety over long-term health, and that changes everything. Stress hormones like cortisol don't just affect mood, they change the gut motility, the stomach acid production, the intestinal permeability, the immune activation. Which, in other words, stress literally alters how you digest, how you absorb, and how you respond to food. So this is why so many people experience, when they are in healing phases, they experience bloating, or they get food sensitivities or inflammation, blood sugar crashes, anxiety that feels biological. Nothing of that is random. It is the body adapting to a world it once had to survive. And when the gut becomes inflamed, the immune system gets involved. So low-grade chronic inflammation sends danger signals back to the brain. So the brain hears that something is wrong, like we need to stay alert, you can't relax yet, even if your life is calm now. So you end up with this disconnect that your mind knows that you're safe, your body is still receiving threat signals. And this is why people say, I feel anxious for no reason, that I can't fully settle. I feel tired, but I feel wired at the same time. Because the nervous system is still listening to biological noise. And diet, it plays a huge role whether that noise amplifies or quiets. Because certain dietary patterns, they increase inflammation and blood sugar instability, like ultra processed foods, long gaps without nourishment, and nutrient deficiencies. And not because whatever is creating those are bad foods, but because the nervous system interprets instability as danger. But on the other hand, consistent nourishment, it stabilizes blood sugar, it reduces activation, and it supports gut lining integrity. It also improves vagal tone, which is your nervous system's ability to downshift. So this is why nutrition matters so much in trauma recovery. You're not just feeding a body, you're sending messages. And trauma, it doesn't just change your mind, it rewires your biological communication system. So healing is not just about insight, it is about restoring signal clarity. When the gut feels safe, the immune system softens. And when inflammation drops, the brain relaxes. And when the brain relaxes, the nervous system finally gets permission to reorganize. And this is why so many people, they don't fully heal until the body is included. And not because they weren't trying hard enough, but because the system was still communicating through. When we talk about nutrition and the nervous system, I want to be very clear about one thing. This is not about superfoods. It is not about perfect diets, and it's not about optimization. It is about capacity, because some foods don't just change chemistry, they change how much your system can hold. Some foods stimulate, some foods stabilize, some foods expand capacity for regulation. And when you are healing trauma, burnout, or any chronic stress, capacity matters more than intensity. Let's talk about omega-3 fatty acids. Not in a technical way, but in a nervous system way. So, omega-3s, they're deeply involved in cell membrane fluidity. They're involved in brain signal, in inflammatory regulation, which translated into real life, it looks like you get so much more clear when you are thinking. Your emotional reactivity softens and you get better recovery from stress. They help the nervous system to respond instead of react. And this is why many people notice I feel less sharp, my thoughts spiral faster, I'm more emotional brittle, and not because they are regressing, but because the system lacks the raw materials for flexibility. Then there are antioxidants. Antioxidants don't calm you emotional, but they protect the nervous system from staying inflamed after stress, which means that you get like fewer lingering stress signals. And that background tension, much less of it, and you feel more resilience after any activation. So you can just think of antioxidants as your like cleanup crews. They are not the mood enhancers. But we have micronutrients, and these are the ones people overlook. So these are magnesium, zinc, B vitamins, iron. And these nutrients, they are involved in neurotransmitter production and in energy metabolism and in stress hormone regulation. And if you don't have them, without these, the nervous system has to work so much harder to do the same job. So without these, you get fatigue without any reason, you get anxiety without a story, and you get a low mood without a meaning behind it. It's just there. Not because something is wrong psychologically, but because the system is under-resourced. And then there is the gut microbiome. This one matters more, so much more than people realize. Your gut bacteria, it help produce neurotransmitters like serotonin, GABA, dopamine, which all of them influence inflammation, immunity, and vagal tone. So when the gut is supported, the nervous system gets clearer feedback. But when it is not, the system stays noisy. This is why regulation isn't just about calming down. It is about signaling quality. And this brings us to the core truth of this phase. Some foods, they change chemistry. Others change capacity. When your system has capacity, stress doesn't knock you over. Emotions, they move through instead of getting stuck. Regulation becomes so much more easier. It's not forced. You don't need to try to be calm. The system simply has the resources to do what it was designed to do. And I want to say this very gently, and especially if you have struggled with food before or are struggling with food. This is not about getting it right. It is about understanding that your nervous system cannot heal on insight alone. It heals when biology and awareness finally work together. Trauma and burnout, they change appetite, they change cravings and hunger cues. And it is so important to listening to those signals differently, because that can become part of healing and it stops being something you try to fix. So there is a conversation we need to have that we never have honestly enough, because food is still treated like a moral issue, like discipline, control, good days, bad days. But trauma does not respond to morality, it responds to adaptation. When the nervous system goes through prolonged stress, loss, or overwhelm, it doesn't just change how you think, it changes how you seek safety. And often appetite is one of the first places this shows up in. Some people, they just lose the hunger entirely. Other, they crave constant stimulation through food. Other people, they feel repelled by eating. Some rely on familiar grounding foods. And then some, they just swing between restriction and urgency back to back. None of this is random. It is the nervous system trying to regulate itself with the tools it has. Because the food, it does so much more than nourish. It soothes, it anchors, it distracts, it stabilizes blood sugar, it releases dopamine, it creates predictability. So if you ever wonder, why do I only feel calm after I eat certain things? Why do I eat when I'm stressed? Why does control around food feel safer than listening? And why do my cravings change during emotional periods? This isn't a lack of discipline. It is intelligence. The body learned, this is how I survive. And in trauma states, the nervous system prioritizes immediacy over balance and familiarity over novelty and regulation over nutrition. So eating patterns become functional. And when those patterns formed during times of overwhelm, grief, or instability, they often stay long after the danger has passed, because the body hasn't been shown another way. So this is why shame never heals food issues. Shame increases threat. Threat tightens the nervous system, and tight system holds harder. So your eating habits, they didn't fail you. They protected you. They helped you to get through something. And healing doesn't happen, it doesn't begin by ripping those patterns away. It begins by understanding what they were solving for. When the nervous system feels safer, hunger cues return more clearly, cravings soften, urgency decreases, and flexibility becomes possible. Not through force, but through safety. This is why healing work that ignores food often plateaus, because the food is still using the same strategies it once needed. And when we meet those strategies with respect instead of judgment, the system finally has room to choose differently. When we talk about healing, like real healing, we often focus on the insight. We understanding what happened, we are trying to name the patterns, and we try to make meaning of the past. And that work, it really matters, deeply matters. We are not disregarding it. But healing doesn't complete itself in the mind, because the body remembers before the mind explains. And it remembers through muscle tone, through hormone rhythms, through immune responses, through digestion, through energy availability. It remembers long before a story forms. This is why someone can understand their trauma intellectually and still feel on edge, still feel exhausted, still feel fragile. Because the system hasn't fully reorganized yet. And nutrition, it plays a quiet, but it plays a powerful role here. And not because food heals trauma, but because it supports the conditions under which healing can stabilize. So when the body is undernourished, inflamed, or metabolically stressed, the nervous system stays vigilant, even if your life is calm now, even if you have done the work. So regulation becomes something you do, not something you live. But when nourishment is consistent, when blood sugar is steadier, when inflammation softens, and when the gut can communicate safety, the nervous system no longer has to work so hard to stay balanced. And this is where many people, they finally notice that emotions, they move through instead of sticking, and the clarity, it lasts longer, and regulation holds under stress. And this is not because they all of a sudden they are better at healing. No, because the body has the resources to remember safety. The body, it always remembers the wounds before the mind does, and nutrition is part of that memory. What you eat tells the nervous system whether the world is predictable or whether the resources are available or whether it needs to stay braced. So when nutrition is supportive, healing isn't just accessed, it is retained. This is why holistic recovery can't be one-dimensional. It needs awareness, it needs insight, it needs mind and metabolism. And as we close today's episode, I just want you to remember that nothing we talked about today is another task. It is everything I've covered. It is just an invitation to include the body in the conversation, to include the body with respect, with curiosity, with patience. Because healing doesn't happen when you push harder. It happens when every system finally feels supported enough to let go. And I want to be very clear about something before we end. Nothing I talked about today is a quick fix. Nutrition is not a solution to trauma. It is not a replacement for therapy. It is not something to get right. Nutrition is a supportive system. It is a way the body is reminded over time that it doesn't have to stay on guard forever. Healing is not a single breakthrough. It is a gradual reorganization. And sometimes the most powerful shifts don't come from insight or effort. They come from the body finally receiving what it has been missing. Not more pressure, not more rules, but enough consistency to relax its grip. If there is one thing I hope you take from this episode, it is you don't have to force your nervous system into safety. You can support it into coherence. And that happens slowly. It happens through signals that says you're not alone, you are resourced, you don't have to brace anymore. So instead of asking, what should I fix? What should I change? What am I doing wrong? Ask yourself, what would your body do differently today if it finally felt safe enough to do it? Just let that question stay open. And thank you so much for listening. And until I see you next time, stay aligned, stay curious, and most important of all, stay true to yourself.